All right. Good morning, good morning, good morning. So, as it were, I actually did have a few more steps to complete. Not too bad, but I had to hop on the Wi-Fi because I decided to actually come live in the conference room as opposed to in my office area. Good morning, good morning, good morning. I am Dr. Tigress Sydney Acute McDaniel, Juris Doctor, the ethical gatekeeper, and it is time to discuss exactly that which I had mentioned on yesterday evening, which is the Carmelo Anthony case. Number one, we want to eradicate misinformation so that we eradicate, which is of course idealistic, but we want to move forward. The goalpost is to eradicate corruption and division amongst society. And that's what the true basis and purpose of the Ethical Gatekeeper platform really is all about. All right. So number one, there has been a lot of discussion about Carmelo Anthony being charged with first-degree murder. Now, whereas it is understandable that these terms are being used colloquially, which just means casually, when you may not have the accurate information, there is no such thing as a first-degree murder charge in Texas. This is important for this case and Carmelo's defense and even the state prosecutor's case because of the elements required to prove someone is guilty of first-degree murder or a criminal charge, okay? So he's actually charged under the Penal Code, or PC 19.02, subsection C. The reason why it is very clear that the state's prosecutor did this is so that it could be a catch-all. It was basically like, okay, you know how you fish with a net instead of maybe a spear, or, you know, like it's a sweeping effort to try to encompass everything that could possibly be considered actionable, basically meaning that he could be found guilty of, as opposed to specifying a very specific statute in a manner that would make it impossible for the state's prosecutor or state prosecutor to be able to prove up their case. Because in the court of law, when there is justice rendered, when it is done correctly, and we know that, number one, we know that the all-white jury and a jury of his peers, those are not his peers. Now, we understand that jurors need to be 18 or older, so we understand that there is the issue of being, basically found guilty by a jury of grown-ass adults. And then when you have the high likelihood of an all-white jury, then having this basically, holding the decision, if you will, in their hands, even though a judge can also reject the jury's verdict if it's not consistent with law, or they can, and that can be either favorable or unfavorable for the defendant, in this case, Carmelo Anthony. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, and I will continue to look and make sure that I look for your questions and answer them in real time. Okay, so effectively what I'm getting at here is some of you are familiar with the IRAC method. That is a very, very staple methodology in the field of jurisprudence or law. The IRAC method stands for issue, rule, analysis, and conclusion. All right. Amongst that, and in conjunction with that, are the elements required to prove either a civil wrong or a criminal wrong. Okay. And in the case of the first degree murder, which again is not the law on the book specifically in Texas, which is under common law. So it's a common law jurisdiction as opposed to a modern law jurisdiction. And that difference is very important as it relates to Carmelo Anthony's case and what needs to be proven to find him guilty of the charge under Penal Code 19.02 subsection C, which actually is just a first degree felony. All right? Okay. As opposed to first degree murder. So they do have the capital murder charge in Texas. And again, you'll understand this a little bit more as I break it down. I feel like I'm going to sound like that show, how to get away with murder or whatever. Even though, remember, as the ethical gatekeeper, my intentions are to impart accurate information so that we increase our personal relationships, albeit romantic, platonic, professional, or otherwise in society, so that we can achieve evolution. This is not for the trolls and the villains to come through and figure out, okay, let me use this information that Tigris is spitting and then, commit more crime. Nah, I rebuke you. Go on about your business. Find something else to do. Elevate yourself. Okay? All right. So in Carmelo Anthony's case, it would have actually been better if he were charged with first degree murder in a modern law jurisdiction. Why do you ask this? Because the elements required to prove up first degree murder require very specific intent. In fact, it's a specific intent crime. Okay. Now that intent can be transferred. And so I'll explain, because some of you have heard of the felony murder rule. You may have heard of it from me, from my political platform, See Tigris Run, when I brought that information to the forefront during the pandemic so that people would understand the crime that Derek Chauvin committed against George Floyd. It was and could be actionable under the felony murder rule. All right. And there were a couple of other matters that I also made reference to. Some of you remember that. Some of you may know about this because I might have some individuals in this chat who are actual either lawyers, meaning that they possess a Juris Doctorate and may or may not be licensed, or they're attorneys. And that implies explicitly, so I guess it's not just an implication, using the title attorney is indicative of a licensed lawyer. So those individuals are going to more likely and should be sufficiently informed about which I speak, okay? For those of you who don't understand, again, it would have been better had he been charged in a modern law jurisdiction in one regard. However, his case still, in my opinion, based on the information that I have, and keep in mind also, I've shared another's post. I believe it's MSNBC, their recent post. And I completely 1000% agree with their post or the celebrity featured therein, who basically said nobody really has all the true facts because we're around the country. If we're not in Frisco, Texas, and we're not sitting in that case trial, in those hearings that are, the everyday hearings for trial, then we're not going to necessarily have all the true facts. We're just not. And so a lot of you are relying upon individuals, troll podcasters, would-be or supposed journalists, like I called out on yesterday evening. Chris Stewart, you should be ashamed. And your colleague, I can't remember his name. I'll make sure to reference it when I archive this live. Let me see. Okay, I don't see anything. Hello for everyone. Again, this is Dr. Tigress Sydney Acute McDaniel, Juris Doctor, and you got it. AI is helping me out here with breaking down the legal charges in the Carmelo Anthony case. Ask any of your legal questions. Remember that none of the information that I provide constitutes legal advisement. This is only for the purpose of vocational education and general information, again, with the complete intent to increase awareness and accurate understanding of law in the United States and beyond, and to bring about our collective evolution. Okay? All right. So we go back to the charges. Again, in the common law jurisdiction, Frisco, Texas, the Penal Code 19.02 subsection C is actually a first-degree felony charge. And so, whereas some of you are wondering, okay, well, can this not be reduced to manslaughter or reduced to this? Or clearly, that is not the state prosecutor's intention. Like I said, he's using a net to catch a goldfish. And that's very intentional, because this particular statute, this codified law, it actually provides for being able to group all of these different scenarios that can result in the killing of a human being without there necessarily being the element of specific intent required. And that's where it gets very problematic. However, like I said before, I strongly believe, based on the information that I have thus far, and also incorporating the evidence or the evidentiary likelihood based on MSNBC's recent post, that Carmelo Anthony did not have a knife, nor was it a 6-inch knife or a 4-inch knife, and instead it was a Boy Scout multi-purpose tool, okay? And we're gonna go over that as well, because I've made some notes here, so stick with me. That also, there was a factual history of the Metcalf twins bullying and disruptive conduct, and even penalties against them. And evidently they had been suspended in some regard. I don't know, from the school itself, or suspended from the track team and the coach. I don't have all the details, but I will continue to cover this, this story. Excuse me, I don't like calling this story. I will continue to cover this case that slipped out because everyone's talking about it as a story. But I'll continue to cover this case as much as I possibly can, because again, I'm in North Carolina. I typically cover North Carolina cases because I'm in North Carolina and I can access the records very readily in North Carolina. I did attempt and will continue to attempt to access court records in other states and their counties, their respective counties. But as I soon realized, as it relates to Frisco, Texas, and my research of their father, Jeffrey Metcalf, who I believe has a history of sexual assault and abuse, which I shown through my last post, it looks like there's a high likelihood that Megan Metcalf, the mother of the twins, and of course the now ex-wife of Jeffrey Metcalf, she filed for divorce against Jeffrey in 2014 in concert after her mother filed divorce against her husband, evidently, Megan's dad. Now that's the maternal side, indeed. But as I pointed out, typically mothers and daughters will stick together. They'll stand in solidarity. And it was just an odd occurrence for them both to file divorce during that time, and for Jeffrey Metcalf's sexual assault case, abuse, right? Only about 3 years earlier, that was still actually pending because there was a writ of habeas corpus that was filed a few years later. Or in that time frame. So that time frame is giving, there might be some family secrets there. And ultimately, the other thing that I pointed out is that Megan Metcalf, the mother again of the twins, she did not prosecute her divorce petition. What does that mean, Tigress? It just means that she filed it, she paid the fees, she bought the t-shirt, but she did not take any other action. So much so that the court actually had to step in and dismissed it for failure to prosecute. And then she filed again 2 years later in 2016 for divorce, and actually had the same level of inactivity, so much so that the court again had to basically pull them into the court, and that can be inferred by the court record. This is looking through the lens of a Juris Doctorate or a lawyer or an attorney, okay? And I showed that, so make sure you go back and look at my previous post. And the court the presiding judge had to bring them to court and say, okay, look, answer up to this. What are y'all doing? What are y'all doing? And in fact, there was a hearing scheduled for the dismissal again for failure to prosecute. But at that time, that dismissal was canceled because there was finally an agreement reached. Now, what I'm getting at when I began speaking about this in the first place, as it relates to me only covering primarily North Carolina cases because I can directly access them, and e-courts generally, all of the court records are accessible by a PDF icon that you can click on very easily and gain immediate access and read the record in toto, okay? Now, of course, there are going to be some exceptions to that because, of course, a judge may seal records or a clerk may index a document incorrectly and not show that it's visible until it is brought to their attention, and at which time they then change it so that it is visible publicly. But generally, case records are to be publicly accessible, okay? That is not the case in Frisco, Texas. I don't know. I can't explain it. But across the board, because this is federal law, whereas court records need to be publicly accessible. However, I believe what's going on here is that court records don't need to be publicly accessible online. And I believe that's where the caveat comes into play. So if you were in Texas, you could go to Frisco County Clerk's office, access the criminal case file, and you could look it up. You're also permitted, because the courts are open by law, by prevailing federal law. So if you're ever interested in sitting through a trial, you are permitted by law to go and sit, and join any trial. You can sit through it, but of course, you're expected to conduct yourself in a manner deemed appropriate by the judge. And the reason why I say deemed appropriate by the judge is because you know that some judges be with the shits. And if they, they can find ways to have you removed from the courtroom by saying, "Oh, I thought you were speaking with someone else, whispering, interrupting the court session, or I believe that you're here with unethical motivation." It could be a number of things that judge could in real time have you removed from the court. And then your only relief at that point would just be to maybe file a administrative complaint, against the judge I don't even think it would go very far with the Judicial Standards Commission. It just doesn't seem to go, breach the threshold for actionable reprimand of a judge. But or maybe talk to your clerk or your mayor's office, and maybe they could use their their influence, if you will, their political influence to get you back into the courtroom. I'm not sure, just so you're aware. But in that particular regard, that's the main reason why I can't access the files directly. So I can't speak informedly on certain aspects of the case. And again, as the ethical gatekeeper, that is the whole basis for my platform, is accurate information. So I'm respectfully regarding that which I don't know. Okay. But that which I do know, I do want to speak on and make sure that it clears up all the confusion. So now we know for a fact there is no first-degree murder charge on the books in Texas. Okay. It is a first-degree felony charge. Again, this, if we don't incorporate Carmelo Anthony's self-defense, okay, then this type of charge is looming. It's bad because it is a catch-all, and specific intent is not the high threshold that is set for a general first-degree murder charge. And as you've heard me speak out, he's not guilty of first-degree murder because there was no specific intent. It can't be proven. There's no criminal mens rea. And criminal mens rea is that specific intent, a criminally minded malice of forethought. This means he planned it and all these things. Now, some people are, jumping to the gun. Again, you've got your internet journalists, right? And your troll podcasters. And it seems the same type of mix of verbal diarrhea is what Chris Stewart is spewing on his channel. And again, I reprimand and rebuke any journalist out there who is promulgating false information or even misinformation or even misrepresenting or even not giving half-truths or even not being exercising due diligence to at least check what they're saying, fact check their own statements, and make sure they're not even implying something that could fuel further discord amongst society. We don't need that because that's what's going on. It's just fueling the race war. It's fueling the division generally. It's fueling people to be going out and be on edge in every interaction that they're having with people because there's so much craziness going on in the world, and the way that Chris Stewart is talking about it does not help at all. All right. And so now let's go on that subject about the knife. All right. So we've covered the elements, and let me just make sure that's clear. So we talked about the IRAC method and then the elements that are required to prove up and find someone guilty of a criminal charge, okay? And with murder, generally, across the board for modern law jurisdictions, you need a killing. So defendant, they always refer to the person, the suspect, the person charged as a defendant, right? So the defendant, so for first-degree murder, there must be a killing of a human being. That's very specific, okay? As opposed to an animal or an insect or something like that, right? There must be a killing of a human with the specific intent, right, of malice of forethought, because we're talking about first degree. We're not talking about second degree. So there must be a malice of forethought. And and that's pretty much that. That's pretty much the meat and potatoes of first degree murder. But again, this is not a first degree murder trial. I'm going to see if I can add, I think I did this before, but we're going to see. Give me a second. Yeah, wallpaper. No, I don't want to go live with guests. Let's see if I can do a sticker. What I'm trying to do is pull up the unlock background, check requirements. Come on. I normally go live on through StreamYard, and then I can actually show you, but I can't do it here. Yeah, I can't do it here. All right, so I'm just going to continue on. But I'm going to put I'm going to put the PC for penal code, and then you can look it up. .02, subsection C. And again, subsection C is the catch-all. It's saying any of these are actionable. All right? And basically, one of the ways or one of the actions taken by a defendant that can be considered a first-degree felony is basically an assault that results in the killing of a human being that was done in such a manner that was so reckless in disregard for human life. And generally, that's like a manslaughter charge everywhere else. And so that's still a felony. So for those of you who are saying, okay, well, I want this to be reduced very specifically to that level, well, in Texas, they have this catch-all, and the catch-all is 19.02. Now, if it can be proven that that there was provocation, because in this particular case, provocation is one of those elements at issue. It's a stipulated, like statutorily, and all that means is that it's literally in the language of the law, that the provocation is a very important element here. And so those are the things that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about the knife. We're going to talk about the fact that he did state, according to the police report, which I read the entire police report, and he stated that I'm not alleged, I did it, in response to a police officer who was who responded and attempted to identify the suspect and saw him across the way or across the field behind a fence, a metal fence, and then called out to him, and they had an exchange. And in so doing, the police officer at some point said, or maybe called back in to report that he had the alleged suspect in custody or in sight. And then in response to that, Carmelo Anthony yelled out or stated that I'm not alleged, I did it. Okay, so that statement. Then why did he have the knife? And the large gathering of at least what I counted were 34 minor witnesses. So these were high school students, very likely, clearly, because it was a high school track meet, right? And 5 coaches that were all present on the scene, okay? And this is noted in the police report. So this is all factual information. In fact, their names are listed, which they have to be, but of course they're redacted in the public post of this police report. Okay, so as it relates to the elements, the biggest issue here, the only issue that I see for the elements to prove up first-degree felony under Penal Code 19.02, subsection C, that Carmelo Anthony and his defense team have to worry about is provocation. Because with his self-defense claim, he cannot be validly found guilty of first-degree felony killing of Austin Metcalf. I think because Hunter is the one that's still alive. Y'all correct me if I'm wrong. I think I might have that backwards right now. But nonetheless, actually no, I think it's Hunter that, someone correct me in the comments. I can't pull it up while I'm doing this. I didn't bring my computer, so I apologize if I have that information incorrect. I'm just going to refer to him as Metcalf, okay? All right, so, and let me touch upon this as well. Why would I look into the history of their father, the twins' father? Let's answer that immediately. The reason why I looked into the history of the father of the Metcalfs is because of the history of abuse, okay? Because we know that generally abusive behavior is learned from parents. Children learn that from their parents first, most likely, right? Or they learn it from close family members, someone they know who has abused them, right? Okay. And so it was not a shock to see that there is the high likelihood of a history of abusive behavior by Jeffrey Metcalf, their father. And abusive behavior very typically shows up, it presents through bullying, okay? Bullies typically have been abused. This is not new information. I don't have to go over my credentials again. Most of us understand that is a psychological, I'll let you come on in, but you've got to be respectful. Otherwise I'm going to decline. Let's see. Well, no, put in the comments if you actually want to join, because I want to make sure that I have clarity who wants to join. All right. So, and I misspoke there. So that understanding of, or that phenomenon, that psychological phenomenon where someone who is a victim of abuse very typically will present those same characteristics to others with whom they engage, that is a psychology maxim, okay? And that just means that it holds true. All right, that being said, we know now, it is factual, that there is a history of not only abusive behavior by their father. We also know that the Metcalfs have a history of bullying at their school. And they also just recently had a suspension based on their bullying behavior at the school, evidently being decided by their track coach, or maybe a teacher or the principal, all right? That is very notable because of this element of provocation. All right. Because if they can't prove that Carmelo provoked this incident, then their entire case is shattered. And in fact, I believe that their entire case is shattered based on the information that I have readily available to me. All right. The reason why I say this is because they're basing this provocation, they're basing this on the fact that Carmelo Anthony evidently stated to Metcalf when he approached him, evidently, and there's conflicting stories in this regard, whether he ran into the tent and immediately confronted Carmelo, or if he was already in the tent, because I watched a news story, and the surviving twin stated that they were already in the tent, but there's a conflicting story, like I said, that the twin, the deceased twin, ran into the tent and confronted Metcalf, and confronted Carmelo. Carmelo then responded initially by saying, as long as you don't touch me, we're good. We're good. I'm just here, like visiting a friend. Just be easy. Be easy. You don't run things. I can imagine how this went, You don't run things. Chill out, dude. You're taking this way out of context. I'm just visiting a friend and then I'm going to be out. There you have it. Okay. And in response, Metcalf then would not back up. Okay. He wouldn't let it go. And so then evidently there were more words. And then Carmelo said again, hey, as long as you don't touch me, we're good. Something to that effect. And at that point, then Metcalf then pushed him. I need people to understand forensics, criminal forensics. I need you to understand that part because, and we're going to move toward the knife, right? Immediately, my thought process with my background in law enforcement through the Federal Park Service. Again, I was a resource education ranger. However, I had a lot of support duties for law enforcement and Border Patrol while active in the National Park Service. Okay, that being said, well, let's talk about inertia. And let's talk about a physical altercation, right? Because we know it got physical, right? Okay. So number one, we have no provocation by Carmelo Anthony because telling someone to leave me alone does not rise to the level of provocation, not in the streets, nor does it rise to the level of provocation necessary to prove that someone caused a fight as opposed to just being a victim of a fight in a criminal trial. It fails miserably. So everyone has the right to tell someone to leave them alone. Even in the hood, like leave me alone. Okay? It just is what it is, all right? And everyone has the right to say, look, I need you to not touch me because, look, I will defend myself. Now, the way that Carmelo Anthony stated it, evidently, saying, touch me and you'll see type of thing, is what everybody's in an uproar about. But that's just colloquial language. Don't get lost in that language because he's basically only saying that which he's lawfully entitled to say. Leave me alone or else I will defend myself. And that is his right. So again, that does not rise to the level of provocation that would be necessary to prove for a guilty verdict of first-degree felony killing of the Metcalf twin. It just fails completely. So that's dead in the water. As it relates to the statement where Carmelo Anthony stated that I'm not alleged, I did it, and everyone is taking that, everyone who is on the side of, well, actually it's just everyone generally who's speaking on it, they're either taking the side that they believe that is a damning, oh no, that's damning. Oh no, that's incriminating. That's making him look bad. Or they're on the side of, yeah, he did it because they, are either racist or, imps and trolls who just want to, stir the pot type of thing. Okay. He made it very clear several times because you can't take things out of context. Not only did he say that I'm not alleged, I did it, he first said, I was protecting myself. And he yelled that out to that first officer to which I referred, or to whom I referred, who saw him across the way behind the fence. the first officer who found him or identified the suspect on the scene type of thing, okay? And clearly, we don't need but one brain cell to know that all that Carmelo Anthony was intending to communicate is, no, I am the suspect you're looking for. I did it, as in I am the person who inflicted the wound in self-defense against Metcalf, but I did not do it as in I intended to kill this kid, right? My peer, this bully. That's not what he intended. So that should be clear now. Take that out. I'm not alleged. I did it is not evidentiary substantiation for a first-degree felony charge of killing the twin. It doesn't work, okay? All right. So the provocation is not there. In fact, the provocation is all on Metcalf because there was no authority. He had no authority at all. Number one, because there's been some reference to, evidently Metcalf was put in charge of the tent by his coach. No. I don't think y'all are understanding this. The authority that is required in a court of law that would then give someone this mitigating factor for exercising such authority, and then if someone were to take action against them and kill them, either intentionally or unintentionally, that type of authority, that is a legal authoritative role, not some authority that you get from your teacher who gives you a hall pass to watch the kids in class. You're the leader in class. No, y'all, that's not what that's for. That's not what that's for. The authority that they're speaking about, or that people are trying to bring into this, and equate with that legal authority. No, that's not the same. It's not the same. So Metcalf had no authority at all. Even if he had been given a role of managing, like watch out for the tent, or you're going to be the leader, or you're going to be the whatever. That authority is completely pointless, unimportant to this case, because he didn't have any authority over the entirety of the track meet. He didn't have any authority over Carmelo Anthony as him coming over to visit someone to talk. There was no such authoritative role there at all. Metcalf was a minor. He had he wasn't a police officer. He wasn't a security officer. He wasn't, and we're talking about an authorized individual employed in that very specific position and empowered through his employment and that position to enforce laws or policy for that school. That's not what that's not there. And the reason why people are inserting this, I think, I'm going to deduce and I'm going to surmise. Let's say we'll surmise. I think and surmise that they're doing that because in that same statute, PC, Penal Code 19.02, there are gradations, again, for or different types of conduct and the intent behind it and the type of conduct that would is how they will sentence. They use that for sentencing purposes. And so this authority is spoken about it's buried in, well, it's not really buried in this particular statute. It's straightforward in your face. And it says that if the killing in this, in this regard is of an officer who has this authority or a judge, right? And it's done in retaliation against the judge or the person in authority who has, this decision-making retaliation against the judge or the person in authority who has, this decision-making authority over the defendant who killed them in retaliation, then the sentencing, of course, would be worse. That's all that's about, okay? So you got to knock that out. The authority, no check. X it out. It doesn't work. The fact that he stated that Carmelo Anthony stated, "I'm not alleged, I did it," cross that out. It's unimportant. And in fact, it's important as it relates to everything else he said, because again, you cannot take it out of context as it relates to his self-defense claim. All right, his defense of self-defense. Okay. Now let's go to the knife, because people are like, why did he bring a knife? It's kind of like, why did you bring a knife to a gunfight? First of all, let's start exactly there. He didn't know he was going to a gunfight. But unfortunately, right now, our society constitutes the discord that we see in everyday relations throughout our society. It constitutes a gunfight. So people are bringing guns and knives. People are walking around, and rightfully so, and even legally so, with a gun or a knife, or they have all these special like little tools especially for like women, or mace, or children, right? And it's for the very specific purpose of self-defense. So in and of the fact that he had it and carried it regularly, evidently, and brought it with him, mind you, it wasn't on his person, it was in his book bag, right? It is not an indication of, oh, look, the evidence is that he thought about this ahead of time with malice aforethought, which would then, in a first-degree murder trial, which this is not, in a first-degree murder trial, that would lend toward proving up the malice required for him to be found guilty of first-degree murder, because that would be specific intent that would lead to that. However, that's not the case here, because all of us are rightfully entitled, constitutionally entitled to carry a weapon that has been, either commercially proper to carry. Now, you can't add on, because there's laws against that. You can't buy a gun lawfully and then add on it these special features that blow holes like 10-inch diameter holes in someone's chest. You know what I mean? So as long as these weapons are either generally on the market, and again, they do not qualify as torture tools or tools that were intentionally manipulated to cause egregious level of damage to, individuals with reckless disregard for human life, then you may carry it. So the fact that he had it is unimportant to this case, okay? Completely unimportant to this case, except where the Metcalf twins have a history of bullying. And it looks like, based on this last post from MSNBC, that Metcalf did know Carmelo Anthony and had been bullying him. And evidently they had maybe a friendship, and maybe it turned sour, or maybe there were interactions because they were on the track team. So they knew each other, right? And I would imagine that, again, after the case concludes, because we won't have it before, there's no way to have a transcript of a trial until there is a conclusion of the trial. Typically, a transcriber is not even going to have the time, because, of course, they are transcribing the entire trial. I've not ever seen where there have been multiple transcribers for one trial. I imagine that could be the case, considering the complexities of a trial, the voluminosity of, the trial record, if you will. But ultimately, the point that I'm making is that the transcriber doesn't normally stop each day, go home, and is required, unlike everybody else that gets to take a rest. They're not required to go home and then spend the rest of their evening transcribing that day, and then make sure it's available to the court for uploading in the case file for everybody to see. No, that's not how that works. So the transcript is not going to be available, very likely, for at the very least 90 days after the conclusion of the trial. And again, I would say 90 days more specifically, because the statute allows for a transcriber to have up to 90 days initially, and they can actually get a continuance for the production of the transcript, but typically the transcript is not produced until 90 days after the request for the transcript, after the conclusion of the trial. So again, that could be 3 months, that could even be 3 months and 2 weeks, based on whatever action takes place immediately after the conclusion of the trial. Okay, that being said, we're not going to have all the specifics that I would, again, want to have, because I'm not able to sit in the courtroom and hear the facts being presented and the arguments being presented in real time. All right. Okay, so the fact, again, that he had a knife, unimportant. But important as it relates to Metcalf's, the twins, bullying him, and not only bullying him, but having a history of bullying and misconduct, disruptive conduct, egregious conduct with the school. Okay? All right. Violent conduct, even if it wasn't physically violent, verbally violent conduct within the school district. Okay, there we have it. All right. So that actually helps Carmelo Anthony's self-defense case, because he kept it with him just in case. And now we're learning that, again, it wasn't a knife, not a 6-inch knife, not a 4-inch knife, but just a Boy Scout tool. Now, evidently, they're saying that he had epilepsy, and even in the report, ironically enough, the police officers refer to him and the witnesses refer to him as a skinny kid. And I thought it was also interesting that the Metcalf, the surviving twin, he refers to Carmelo as a kid. Now, keep this in mind. They're the same age. The twins and Carmelo are basically the same age. So the twins wouldn't qualify to call him a kid. And typically when we use terms that of inferiority, we're intending to connote inferiority. And so I believe that his figure, based on that information alone, we can deduce that Carmelo Anthony was smaller in size. How much smaller, we don't know. There is, according to Jeffrey Metcalf, he's saying that his son was not that big. But according to the coaches and other witnesses and other records, which is just straightforward. This shouldn't be contested because there's an autopsy and all that kind of stuff. How much did he weigh? How tall was he? Easy does it. That he was an athlete. I know as an athlete, you get weighed, you have your physical exams that are required to be presented to your coach just to try out for, whatever sport. And then you have to do that on a regular basis. So the information needs to be readily out there, and it's exacting. This is not something that we're just playing around with and considering. No, it can't be conflicting reports. How much did the child weigh? How tall was he? And according to his mama, in her interview, she refers to him as her big old, like he was the bigger one, her big teddy bear. Now, mind you, she could also be referencing the fact that she is much shorter. You can tell she's much shorter than them. But it's referenced that he's 6'1" and 200 pounds. I'm 5'9" and 160 pounds. And I can guarantee you, I'm always slated for the big woman, big black woman, big scary black woman energy that people, honey, it is funny to see how some people react to me in public when they see my stature, okay? And so if you see a 6'1" man, well, he was, he's a kid too, technically, but if you see a 6'1" male figure who's 200 pounds, I don't think that, I don't even think that, I don't think anyone would want to fight someone that size. I'm just going to say that, okay? And if Carmelo Anthony was significantly or even smaller than him, maybe it's like, okay, I know I can't win this fight, but I'm allowed to defend myself. And he is. And he is. And he is. And especially when the weapon of choice is not one that has been manipulated to cause, to inflict some type of injury that is not, in proportion or is not in reckless disregard for human life. He didn't have a torture weapon with spikes. Y'all are just taking this way, way out of context. He didn't have a machete. He didn't have a sword. He evidently had a Boy Scout multi-purpose tool. And even if he had a pocket knife, it is very common, and I find it very ironic, I find it very Caucasian for the white racist people who are jumping into this, into this conversation, how they're just like, why would he have a knife? Well, I'm confused because y'all carry them all the time. And y'all like to carry the ones that have all the jagged edge and like the real fancy ones, the ones that you be like, yeah, I can scalp a pig, or, I can scalp a beaver, and we're out here hunting and da 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 da. So calm down. Calm down. He had a self-defense tool, and he rightfully had it. And it appears that he not only rightfully had it because that's his constitutional right, as it is for all of us, but he had it because there was a very specific reason he needed to protect himself from bullying, from Metcalf bullying, from bullying in general. We don't know who else he was dealing with. High school is a very volatile place, okay? We all know that. We just saw the young man who was killed and found rolled up in a rug in his high school in South Carolina. And so, and I assert that a lot of our teenage boys and girls are, again, like I said earlier in this live, they're on edge with everything that's going on. So they do feel like they have to bring a knife to a gunfight. And bring a gun to a gunfight. Because the gunfight is our society right now. And if we're real with one another, then we know that it cannot be argued against. So go argue with your mama. All right. So why did he have a knife? The regular carrying of the knife is the defense. That's the mitigating factor. The mitigating factor is like the favorable factor, the good factor in a very bad case type of thing. He carried it all the time. So he didn't carry it that day with the specific intent to kill Metcalf. So it works two ways. If he had it, and he had it for the purpose of specifically defending himself, if necessary, against Metcalf's bullying threats, done and done. He's well within his rights. If he had it and was carrying it on a regular basis for self-defense generally, then that's well within his rights. None of that, none of that shows that he had the specific intent, the malice aforethought required to prove up first-degree murder. Now remember, first-degree murder is not what they're trying to prove because that doesn't exist in Texas. All right. And it looks like I'm going to have to repost this. I hope that if you have any questions, once you see this, once I repost it, please let me know. Again, what's the charge at issue? first-degree felony. So we go back to this provocation. And now we speak, lastly, about the large gathering of witnesses. Somebody's not being truthful. A lot of somebodies are not being truthful. And the truth is going to come out. It's going to come out. Because this wasn't an incident that happened where we initially thought it was just a few people on the field. It was at the beginning of the track meet, indeed. And indeed, evidently, this tent at issue was the only one that had been put up thus far at that point. However, there were, because it's well noted in the police report, this is not Tigress McDaniel trying to surmise or use my deductive skills. This is directly in the report. The police report references and names, specifically names because their names are redacted in the police report, that there was a large gathering of 34 witnesses and at least 5 coaches. So not only do you have the kids, which, sometimes you can rely on their testimony, sometimes you can't. And this can be a myriad, for a myriad of reasons. Some, are not going to want to be involved at all because they're traumatized by the event altogether. And some are not going to be reliable in that regard because they're not going to recall all the information accurately because they are traumatized. Okay? But you had 5 coaches. You had 5 adults there. 5 adults. And they know. They know what happened. They know the truth. They know the truth. So in this particular case, the truth of the matter is that there is no provocation as it relates to Carmelo Anthony. He didn't provoke it. Telling someone, please leave me alone, does not rise to the level of provocation. Telling someone after they continue to harass you that they need to stop or else you will defend yourself also does not qualify as provocation because Carmelo Anthony and everyone has the right to tell someone to leave them alone or else I will defend myself. And however they make that statement, because it's colloquial, not everyone speaks in the same manner. And the language that Carmelo Anthony used is consistent with everything else that he stated which is on record in the police report. And he didn't hit him or use the knife on him again. Now let's go back to the criminal forensics and close up this part of it because I want to make sure I complete my thought in that regard. It appears that when we're talking about inertia, okay, so this is when there's a physical altercation and people are moving around, scuffling, right? Okay, and in this case, it's 2 people because evidently, according to Metcalf's brother, his surviving twin, he says out of his own mouth that evidently it happened so fast he could not intercede. And then at one point, he also says that he didn't even realize that it had become altercation. And then he also suggests that he didn't have time to intercede. It's just interesting. His recollection is also interesting. But nonetheless, when there is inertia, right? And kinetic energy, right? And this altercation. And I immediately saw it like this, and I wonder if you saw it like this as well. If someone is coming, if they're lunging at you and you're trying to protect yourself and you're using this multi-purpose tool, and you're like, okay, and I'm gonna use this to keep him off of me, right? And then it goes into their chest. I don't know if, again, with that movement and everything, I believe that what happened is it then made the gash, it opened the gash even more based on how he may have fallen. And that's the part of this that I would like to hear more detail about. It appears that the forensic scientists failed to report that specificity in the trial based on the reporting that I've seen thus far. Like Chris Stewart's report, it's insufficient in this regard. And he has someone that has a reporter that's actually sitting in the trial the entire time. And his reporter brings back and says, hey, the forensic scientist pointed out that the gash was 2 inches wide. And then he refers to it as a hole as well. It has a hole in the chest, but he doesn't talk about it in diameter or radius. And I find that very interesting. Now, again, this can just be an issue with the reporter not understanding science and not being able to then be a appropriate science communicator for the general public. And again, that's the reason why I'm like, y'all should sit down if you don't know what you're doing. That information would be very important in understanding the nature of the wound and how the wound was caused. Whether Carmelo Anthony is guilty of first-degree felony killing of this twin is not directly the information that I'm intending to refer to as it relates to the wound. The wound itself, I believe, was inflicted in a manner of self-defense, and unfortunate for the Metcalf twin based on whatever the scuffling was and how he moved, whether he was intentionally still thrusting his body toward Carmelo Anthony, or he fell and the tool then severed more of his skin. Or his tissue. That's the part of the forensic science that I would want to hear more about. Okay? I believe that's what occurred because Carmelo Anthony threw the knife and ran. And it looks like, according to everything that's being said, he realized that the gash was, based on Carmelo Anthony's own testimony or in the report, he realized, oh God, did I do that? I only intended to, I intended to jab him, but not stab him in the heart, not stab him and open up his chest. That wasn't the plan. And we know that is the high likelihood of Carmelo Anthony's mens rea, right? His mental state, because he was crying hysterically when he identified himself to the police officer saying, I'm not alleged, I'm the suspect that you're looking for, I did it. Is the kid, is he gonna die? He didn't say is he gonna die, is he gonna be all right? And then he's crying hysterically. He knows, wait, hold on, I didn't intend to do all of this. I just wanted to keep him off me. I wanted to jab him in the chest and let him know to leave me alone forever, but not jab him in the chest and open up his chest and take his life. And that's what I believe the witnesses know, the 34 witnesses and the 5 coaches know, and Metcalf's surviving twin brother. They all know. It appears, in my professional opinion, based on the evidence that is available to me, that Carmelo Anthony is innocent of first-degree felony under Texas statute Penal Code 19.02 subsection C. I wish I was the judge in this case. This case would have been concluded and disposed when the defense attorney, Carmelo Anthony's defense attorney, moved for a directed verdict after the state closed its case. I would have granted the defense attorney's motion for a directed verdict finding Carmelo Anthony innocent, acquitted, and dismissed the charges against him, which is, inherent with acquittal, and released him immediately. It is unfortunate that bullying resulted this time in death. Stop bullying. This is a message to all who would engage bullying. Stop bullying. This is not the day and age to go about bullying, especially in a faithful society that we live in, which is fuck around and find out. I literally, those who know me well, I wish, and I know it's so idealistic and warm and fuzzy, I wish that we could just have better relationships across the board. Romantic, platonic, family, professional, all. Unfortunately, the reality of humankind is that will not be an absolute occurrence. But we can evolve so that it becomes our majority. So it becomes our vast majority. This has been another episode of The Ethical Gatekeeper with yours truly, Dr. Tiger Sydney Acute McDaniel, Juris Doctorate. Until next time, be kind to one another. Resolve your conflict with your fellow man.